Genesis 14. In Genesis 13, we saw Abram. In Genesis 12, we saw Abram meeting the Lord, and the Lord commanding him to go into Canaan, and then he went down into Egypt, and he lied about his wife, and they came back up. And, he was with Lot, and in Genesis 13, Lot's cattle and Abram's cattle were too much, and their people were fighting, and so Abram said, hey, look, you look one way or the other, and you decide where you're going to go, and I'll go the other way. So Lot looked towards Sodom. Big mistake. And he chose the plain of Jordan and journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. And Abram ended up in a city that we learned a good bit about there at the end. Does anybody remember the name of the city there in verse 18? Hebron. Yeah, in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron. And built there an altar unto the Lord. So Abram ends up living in Hebron, which we saw is an important city. That's where he and his kids were buried. That's where David reigned his first 7.5 years over Israel. Very important city. Genesis chapter 14. So Lot is in Sodom and Gomorrah, that area. Abram is south in Mamre, in Hebron. I'll get this map out so you can kind of have a picture. This thing is coming handy. 5 or 6 kids at it. Oh, perfect. Okay. So this is a zoomed in picture a little bit here. So here's Israel, and you've got, the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea down here. They were on a mountain somewhere around here between Bethel and Ai, and they looked on one side, looked on the other. Lot chose to go and take this side, which was the valley, and Abram went down on this side to Hebron. See where Abram wound up? And Lot's over here. This Sea of Galilee we're going to see today, the Dead Sea down here. The Bible doesn't call it the Dead Sea. It calls it the Salt Sea, and it is supposedly the saltiest sea on the planet. That Salt Sea didn't used to be a sea. Before, it used to be just a valley. That's where Sodom and Gomorrah were. That's where Lot chose to live. So, I'll leave that right here so you can have kind of a picture of what was going on there. Yeah, I'll pull it up if you need it. Genesis chapter 14 and verse 1. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Eleazar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations. If we had to vote on who had the coolest name, I'd say it's Tidal, because king of nations is a really cool name. Shinar. Does anybody remember that word, Shinar? What does that remind you of?
Sonar.
Sorry?
Sonar.
Sonar, yeah. In the Bible, Shinar, in Genesis 10:10, it said, the beginning of his kingdom, that's Nimrod, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. In the land of Shinar. Shinar is down here, Mesopotamia. That valley, that river area where the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers flow down into the Persian Gulf. This is Shinar, and that's the land where the Tower of Babel was built. That is the land that became Babylon, the kingdom, where Nebuchadnezzar reigned. And Amraphel was the king of Shinar. Interesting fact, in Zechariah chapter 5, verse 11, it's a really weird passage. Zechariah has a vision of this ephod, that breastplate thing that the priests wore, the ephod. There's a flying ephod. And Zechariah sees it and asks this angel, what in the world is that? And there's a woman sitting on it, and she has a talent of lead. And I don't even really understand the passage, but God's displeased with them. And then these 2 flying women with wings come and take that ephod, and they carry it over into the land of Shinar. And the angel tells Zechariah it's going to have a house built for it there in the land of Shinar. And it's going to be set up in the house. You say, what does that all mean? I don't know. But for whatever reason, there in the land of Shinar, there's going to be an ephod, and it's going to have a temple or a house set up for it there. Shinar. Next, we've got Arioch, king of Eleazar. And Eleazar is mentioned 2 other times in the Bible. And it says that's where the children of Eden lived. You can just look up It's actually spelled different. If you want the references, it's 2 Kings 19, verse 12, and Isaiah 37:12. The same place. It's a different spelling, but the same place. That's where the children of Eden lived. Whatever that means. It's a city somewhere in Mesopotamia. So we're talking about these areas over in Mesopotamia. Shinar and where the people of Eden came from, which was in that area. Next, we've got Kedor Laomer, king of Elam. And Elam is talked about plenty of times in the Bible. In Jeremiah 49 and verse 38, God says that for a time he is going to set his throne in Elam. So we've got a temple in Shinar. We've got God's throne going to Elam. These are cities that have important future prophetic significance. And Elam is a province in Babylon. You see that later in the Bible too. You can look it up if you want to. So, and then title, King of Nations, which I guess he was probably a bigger hotshot. Most of those three, Shinar is a small area. Elam, I think, is a province. Elisar seems like a city. But then you've got Title, who's king of, nations. So he must have been the big shot, kind of running the show, I guess. How many kings is that? How many kings is that? 4. Good. We've got Shinar, Elisar, Elam, and the king of nations. So we've got 4 kings in Genesis 14:1. What'd they do? It says that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom. And Bersha, king of Gomorrah. Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim. And then this one down here he calls Bela, the king of Bela, which is Zoar. So Zoar is the name that Moses would use for it. Bela, I guess, is what the Canaanites would call it. That these made war with these, how many? 5. So there's 5 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've got 4 kings coming against these 5 kings. All of these 5, we're going to see here in a moment, all of these 5 live in that vale of Siddim. They all live what is now the Salt Sea, this valley that used to be dry and now it's wet. I'll give you a guess as to why God covered it with salty water. All of these people lived here, and they were just small cities. This was an unfair war, okay? It was kings of nations and massive provinces versus these little kings in these little cities. Okay? It was not a fair matchup, if you want to call it that. Verse 2, we've got some details on those kings here. In Genesis 10:19, I want to show you something. Genesis 10:19. We're talking about Ham's descendants here. Ham's descendants. And if you remember, Noah put a curse on his grandson named what? Canaan. In Genesis 9:26, he said, "Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant." In verse 27, he said, "Cursed be Canaan. A servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren." Canaan was cursed to be a servant of servants. In Genesis 10:19, it says, "And the border of the Canaanites," that's the descendants of Canaan, the cursed one, "the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, as thou goest," I've lost my place, as thou comest to Gerar, unto Gaza, as thou goest unto Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and Zeboim, even unto Lasha." So all these places right here, and you're going to see another place in the Bible, Zoar is too, these are where Canaanites dwelt. The descendants of Ham, specifically the descendants of Ham's cursed son, Canaan. They're cursed folks under this curse. A servant of servants shall he be to his brethren. He was cursed to be a servant, enslaved. Back in Genesis 13:10, talking about that valley, when Lot is looking at it in 13:10, Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that's these people's land, the sea, the Dead Sea, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. So, Lot looked down there, and instead of a big salt sea, what he saw was a beautiful valley that was watered like the Garden of Eden. So the Jordan River ran through it, and it was beautiful. So beautiful that Lot wanted to live there. And these Canaanites had inherited a beautiful piece of property. I don't believe they were supposed to be there. I believe they were supposed to be in Africa, where Ham went. But instead, they were there, and they were on this beautiful piece of property, these Hamite Canaanites. And these nations, Sodom and Gomorrah, you know who they are. They're famous. In Zephaniah chapter 2, verse 9. Zephaniah 2:9. Talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't expect you to turn there. I'm going to read it right when I get there, but you can. Haggai, Zephaniah, Zechariah, Malachi. In Zephaniah chapter 2 and verse 9, it says this. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, surely Moab shall be as Sodom, and the children of Ammon as Gomorrah, even the breeding of nettles and, here's what he says, salt pits. And a perpetual desolation. The residue of my people shall spoil them, and the remnant of my people shall possess them. Okay. Next, Admah and Zeboim in Jeremiah 49, verse 18. Jeremiah 49:18. It talks about these two cities, not by name. They're mentioned other places in the Bible. But he says something very significant here in Genesis 49:18. As in the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, listen, and the neighbor cities thereof. The neighbor cities. I don't know where they were laid out, but let's say that this was the valley. There's mountains on this side and mountains on this side. And say Sodom was here and Gomorrah was here. There's a mountain over here. Zoar maybe was over here, kind of far away. You know, out of the city, but close enough to be in the same valley. Admah and Zeboim were neighbor cities with Sodom and Gomorrah. They were close. They were not that far away. And because they were close to Sodom and Gomorrah, they caught the wrath of God. God pointed that out to me while I was studying this. In Jeremiah, he says the neighbor cities. You didn't have to be in Sodom and Gomorrah to be destroyed. You could have just been close. You don't even want to be close to that wickedness that's going on, okay? God's judgment might catch you while he's smiting the other people. You know what I'm saying? Get the idea?
Amen.
Don't be a neighbor city to Sodom and Gomorrah.
Amen.
Don't hang out and be buddies with a gay person.
Amen.
Or fill in the blank sin. Get what I'm saying? And Zoar, if you remember, is the place where Lot flees to. When God tells him to get out of Sodom and he doesn't, and finally the angels grab his family and boot them out, he flees unto this place that it says it was near. He goes to Zoar. And God, because Lot went to Zoar, God spared Zoar. Now, when the sun rose, when he got into Zoar, and the Lord sent down fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah, and he told him, don't look back, while he was destroying the cities of the plain. And his wife decided to look back, right?
Mm-hmm.
What'd she turn into?
Salt.
A pillar of what?
Salt.
Oh, that's interesting. Deuteronomy 29:23. Deuteronomy 29:23. And that the whole land thereof, talking about this valley, in Deuteronomy's day, this is hundreds of years after Genesis 14. In Deuteronomy 29:23, it says, and that the whole land thereof is brimstone and salt and burning, that it is not sown, nor beareth, nor any grass groweth therein, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in his anger and in his wrath. So you've got brimstone, and you've got salt, and you've got burning and desolation. Nobody could plant anything because God utterly destroyed that plain, that valley. It was no good anymore. And lastly, Zoar, like I just said, that's the city that Lot fled to. Back to Genesis chapter 14. Daniel, why did you point out salt so much? Look at Genesis 14 and verse 3. All these were joined together, where? In the vale, or that means valley, in the vale of Siddim, which is what? The Salt Sea. So today on a map, and in Moses' day, what they had right there was a big sea that was so salty, they named it none other but the Salt Sea. Say, why is it so salty, Daniel? Ask a scientist today why the Salt Sea is so salty. People go to the Salt Sea for healing baths, and they go to dive in it because it cleanses their skin and helps them with rosacea and all the skin problems people have. People use this. It's famous around the world for being the saltiest sea in the world, so they go there for the salt. Ask a scientist, why is it salty? Well, we've seen that there are mineral deposits in the earth and blah, 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 blah. You know why it's salty? Lot's wife is dissolved in the water, brother. It had salt pits. Lot's wife. There was one more passage in there. Salt in Deuteronomy. It's salty because just like in war, we learned in history class that when I think it was the Romans, when they went down and invaded Carthage in North Africa, when they took out the fields, they would burn the fields, and then afterwards, they didn't just leave them to be replanted. What did they do? They salted the ground, because when you salt the ground, it won't grow any grain anymore. You can't produce food. That's what you do when you've conquered somebody. So when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, he didn't just leave it to be rebuilt. He salted that thing. You say, what happened when the water filled it up? Well, it's salty water. That water doesn't go anywhere, by the way. It just evaporates. It doesn't outlet anywhere. The Jordan River ends in the Dead Sea is what they call it today, because salt kills, so everything's dead. It's a dead sea. In the Bible, it's called the Salt Sea because of Lot's wife and all the other reasons. Verse 5. I'm sorry. I had another thing to say here. Jesus said, I don't remember the passage, but Jesus said, quote, remember Lot's wife. It's a good idea. Remember Lot's wife. Fun facts about the Salt Sea, the Dead Sea. 1, it is the lowest point on the planet. Supposedly, it's the lowest surface on the planet. It is 1/4 of a mile lower than the sea level. It's deep. That is low. Like New Orleans is low, but the Salt Sea is like 1,200 feet low. Very low. From what I got on Google, I looked up, it's the Israel's traveler website. It says, an unusual feature of the Dead Sea is that it spits up small pebbles and blocks of asphalt from deep seeps into its surface. From the deep seeps to its surface. So all day, every day, little pebbles and blocks of asphalt come up in the Salt Sea. That's interesting. They put that on their, official website of Israel, which is kind of cool, I have a question. What is asphalt? Where do you get asphalt? Did you know that fire has to be involved in the creation of asphalt? Kind of like brimstone. I think the Bible word for what comes up every day in pebbles and chunks is brimstone. So they've got salt, which the Bible attested to. They've got brimstone bubbling up to the surface every day, which the Bible attests to. And people still don't believe the Bible. You don't have to prove the Bible is true by going to the Salt Sea, but it helps every now and then to show someone, hey, look, the Bible's true. There's a sea that's salty, and brimstone bubbles to the surface every day. It's the lowest point on earth. This is really interesting to me. It's 234 square miles, which is exactly 1/3 of the surface of Moore County, North Carolina. That's a big sea. Very big sea. Its average depth is about 666 feet deep. So that's great. Okay. Genesis 14, verse 4. 12 years, so these people, 12 years, they served Kedorlaomer, and in the 13th year, they rebelled. What? In the 13th year, they rebelled. Which year? 13. What's the number of rebellion?
13.
In the 13th year, they rebelled from what? Being servants. You remember what they were cursed to be, these Canaanites? A servant of servants shall he be. And they decided, hey, it's been 13. We've had enough. We're rebelling. What does Genesis 13:13 say? And the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. I'm going to read you a fun little historical document. This is an amendment to our Constitution, by the way. In 13th year, they did what? They rebelled from what? Serving. Being servants, like being slaves to another king, right? This is an amendment to our Constitution. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Posted Congress, January 31, 1865. Passed December 12, 1860, or December 6, 1865. No slavery. We're not going to have any more slavery. Guess what number amendment that is? Oh, America. Try to at least hide your rebellion against God. At least try to make it sneaky. In 13, they rebelled from being servants. Canaanites, by the way. Okay. And in the 14th year came, so they rebelled, and 1 year later, what happens? Well, the big man in charge came. 14th year came Kedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, and there were 4. And smote the Rephaims in Ashtaroth, Carnaim, and the Zuzims in Ham, and the Emims in Sheva Kiriathaim, and the Horites in their Mount Seir unto Elparan, which is by the wilderness. Now, something you need to notice here. All these places he just mentioned were not in the valley we're talking about. He kind of took a big sweep around here in Edom and all around in the west, and he kind of took a sweep and wiped out some of these cities. A part of that is, God judged those cities for being wicked Canaanites. 2, God was preparing that turmoil for the people of Israel. Every one of those places, eventually, a Jew inherited it in the book of Joshua, which is pretty cool. So he goes kind of on this sweeping wipeout. That includes some giants, by the way. The Zuzims and the Emims were giants, according to Deuteronomy 2. You want to write that down. Deuteronomy 2, 10 and 11, and verse 20. Says that the Zuzims and the Emims were called giants. Back to Genesis 14, verse 7. And they returned and came to En-Mishpat, which is Kadesh. That's the place where the Jews decided not to go into the promised land. And what they do? And smote all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazezon Tamar. And that place is later called En-Gedi. Okay, verse 8. And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same as Zoar, and they joined battle with them. I just lost my place. They joined battle with them in the vale of Siddim, with Kedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar. 4 kings with 5. So it was the kings of these 5 cities rebelled, and so this other king came to fight, and he kind of took a big sweep of other people and then came to deal with his folks, and they stood up and said, we're going to fight you, right? So, when the Canaanites stand up to fight, I don't know what they were thinking. Maybe they were thinking, hey, it's 5-on-4, we're going to win. As you can see right here, it doesn't go well. Verse 10, and the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. That tells you how the battle went. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. You know what else that means? That means these 2, abandoned their neighbor cities. They left them on the field of battle and they fled. and fell there. And they that remained, these guys, fled where? To the mountain. That's the same exact place that Lot will flee in Genesis chapter 19. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah. You say, who took the goods? Those 4 big kings. They took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals, we say victuals around here, and went their way, and they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. You know what's funny to me? These were 4 kings of massive nations. Very important people. And if they had just left Lot behind, they would have been fine. They would have totally gotten away with it. But because they took one person that God was interested in, things go very badly for them. Verse 13. And there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, the brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. It says, there came one that had escaped and told Abram. That should remind you of something. Does that ring any bells? One person escaping from a battle and telling somebody else? Think about Job. All of his servants were slain, but one escaped and told him, remember? Think about David, the Amalekite who came and told David that Saul was dead. How is he dead? Didn't go well for that guy. There's one more. When Hophni and Phinehas took the Ark of the Covenant out to battle with the Philistines and it was taken, only one guy came back and told Eli. It's a trend throughout the Bible. I don't know why. I don't know the meaning. All I know is there's at least 4 times where one person gets away from the battle to give a report. And that happens with David too, with his son. Absalom, when Absalom dies. There's one guy and then there's kind of a race between those 2 guys. But somebody's fleeing the battle to report back to the king. So, this guy came and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Aner. So we've got these 3 guys, Mamre, Eshcol, however you want to pronounce it, and Honor, I don't know. We have those 3 guys. And these were confederate with Abram. So the situation we have is that these 4 massive kings have conquered this valley, and they've taken Lot. And now Abram down here in Hebron gets his 3 buddies and says, let's go. We got to go get them. All right? I'm sorry, they were confederate with him. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. Verse 14. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants born in his house, 318. 318 armed, trained servants in his house. How many armed, trained servants do you have in your house? None. He was really wealthy. 318 people? That's a massive company. That's a big group of dudes. Abram was very, very rich. And he had 318. That's just the fighting age, well-trained men that were born in his house. And he took them and pursued them unto Dan. So he pursued those 4 kings. How many people did he have?
319.
Like 319, including himself. And he was pursuing 4 kings with their armies. What? And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them. That should ring a bell in your head. Who does that remind you of? 300 men against a massive army, and they divide themselves by night and smite them and pursue them? Gideon. That's the army of Gideon, or the story of Gideon, the same exact situation. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them, 300 men against these massive armies, and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. So they were going north. He pursued them all the way to Hobah. Verse 16. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot, and his goods, and the women also, and the people. Wow. So, what has happened here? little Abram the Hebrew, who's just one rich guy, single-handedly with his army goes and destroys these 4 nations, which is amazing. If God is on your side, I'll bet it made Abram confident. We know that it says in Romans chapter 4 that he staggered not at the promises of God through unbelief. When God said, you'll be a father of many nations, he believed him fully right away. And as far as we know, right here, he doesn't have a son yet, but he still goes and risks his own neck in the middle of the night against probably the 4 most powerful people on the planet. You talk about some confidence and bravery, but I don't think he was confident and brave just because he thought he was something. I think he knew, 1, I've got to take care of my brother's son. 2, if I die, then God's a liar. Or he'll raise me from the dead, you know? Talk about some confidence. He had confidence in God's words to make sure that he would be safe, that God would fulfill his promise. And he went and did a very valiant thing there. And when he comes back, by the way, these guys are who you're going to risk your neck for? No, it was for his brother's son. But he also took care of all the people his brother lived with, no matter how wicked they were. He helped him out. We're going to read through this next part, and then we're going to be finished. We'll teach on it next week, Lord willing. Verse 17. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Kedorlaomer, and of the kings that were with him, at the valley of Sheva, which is the king's dale. You know what? We'll stop right there. We'll get into it next week. So far, Abram has gone, conquered those kings, got Lot and all the possessions back. And next week, we'll talk about what happens when he gets back. Any questions at all about what we've taught on? Okay, cool. Hey, something that you need to know is that I don't use dictionaries. I don't use commentary. I'm just using the Bible and handy-dandy concordance, and the Holy Spirit of God helps me. Any of this, any information, like, all the details about the kings and the nations and what's going to happen in them, it's a word search and a prayer away. I mean, study and do the work. God can give this information to you. It's no secret thing. It's not hidden under a rock. You've just got to do the digging in the Bible to find it. And the Holy Spirit of God will help you just as much as anybody. I say that for 2 reasons. 1, it's not any hidden knowledge that I have, random thing. I'm only trying to give you what God has shown me in the Bible. And 2, you can get it on your own too. So do the work and go and see what God's got for you wherever you're studying.